Welcome to the Right to Reason podcast. I am your host, Robert Stanley. Today, I'll be talking to Ethan Gregory Dodge and Ryan McKnight from truthandtransparency.org. They will be presented by Tracy Harris. She is straight up crazy about these guys and wants you to find out all the wild stuff they've been up to.
It's the Right to Reason podcast.
This episode of the Right to Reason podcast is brought to you by our patrons and contributors like me. We have all recognized the value of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
And today we're joined with Tracy Harris, Ryan McKnight, and Ethan Gregory Dodge. Folks, I'm so happy to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
We're talking about the Truth and Transparency Foundation. Tracy, how'd you find these crazy bastards?
Well, back when I was with Godless Bitches, we had an interview with Ethan, and I had never heard of, I think it was Mormon Leaks at the time. And Ethan came on and talked about some legal battles that they were having with regard to what they were doing, and just kind of they're going to talk more about what they do, but it's literally a website that leaks information that has to do with corruption and misdeeds by religious institutions and organizations. And they were Mormon Leaks, and then they've expanded now into truthandtransparency.org, and they do a much broader range of exposure at this point. And just the Godless Bitches episode, I believe, is still online. If anybody wants to Google it, you could probably Google that plus Mormon Leaks plus Ethan, and it'll come up. But it is a very interesting episode.
I'll have that link in today's show notes along with the Truth and Transparency Foundation. Ryan, Ethan, can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Like Tracy said, we started out as a website called Mormon Leaks, and that, first iteration came about in late 2016. I released some videos that got some attention that somebody had sent me, and then it kind of led to sort of a clamoring within the ex-Mormon community, because they were related to the Mormon Church, which Ethan and I both used to be Mormons. Ethan put together a website where people could go on and submit files and videos and whatever kind of media through the website, and maintain total anonymity if they wanted to. It was kind of a shot in the dark, but the concept was proven very quickly. As in short order, we had leaks that made news, definitely in Utah, and a few things that made national news. We had quite a bit of success as Mormon Leaks within the Mormon community. Ethan and I would occasionally be contacted by somebody from another religion. They would usually either ask if Ethan could build them a website that they could run, sort of similar, for their religion, or they would ask if, we would be willing to publish things from another religion, these kinds of things. And so we felt like maybe there was a need. Initially, we launched a second website, a sister website to Mormon Leaks called Faith Leaks. And it was sort of intended to be, Mormon Leaks, but for everybody else. We had some moderate success, not as much success, unfortunately, as Mormon Leaks, but we did have some leaks that got national and even international attention. So there was a few sort of successes there. About a year after we launched Faith Leaks, we had already established this 501c3 called the Truth and Transparency Foundation, and the two websites were sort of operated under that umbrella, and we had the 501c3 so that people could, make tax-deductible donations and whatnot. In late 2017, Ethan and I started to sort of get a bug that we kind of wanted to do our own actual stories, because what we were doing up to that point is we were essentially curating documents. We were getting these documents, we were verifying their authenticity, and we were just putting them up on this wiki that we had. We had our own wiki. We still have it. And we would put these documents up with a very sort of vanilla, generic description of what the documents were, just bare bones, and then sort of let the public decide what they meant. And if the media was ever interested, then of course the media would, pick it up and write a story. Yeah. So in about late 2018, we decided that, we wanted to start writing our own stories and doing our own investigative reporting. So we kind of started to prepare for that. And in the beginning of 2019, we started writing our own story. So if people go to truthandtransparency.org right now, they'll be able to see all the stories we've written since the beginning of this year. And for the most part, they revolve around documents that we also leaked in conjunction with the story. We really want to just cover religious issues that relate to transparency. We obviously, I'm sure a lot of your listeners and just, a lot of people out there understand that, transparency is something that is lacking in most religions. I don't want to say all religions because there are a couple out there that do a decent job, but most religions leave something, to desire when it comes to transparency. And of course, a lot of times that lack of transparency revolves around wanting to keep certain embarrassing things quiet. Not always. I mean, sometimes we just would like, it'd be just nice to have some financial transparency, which doesn't have to inherently be a negative thing. But, obviously the stories that seem to come to us often revolve around, negative things that are being trying to kept quiet. So anyway, we've written a number of stories this year. As people, if they go to the website, they'll be able to see that. So yeah, and right now we find ourselves, here as we wrap up our first year of doing investigative reporting with some real good successes, I think, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. We find ourselves at somewhat of a financial crossroads as we try to expand this and broaden the scope of our work to more than just Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses, which is all we've really reported on up to this point. And we are in massive need of a financial infusion, if you will. People go to our website right now, truthandtransparency.org, they'll see an announcement at the top, that kind of directs them to a fundraising page that we're doing. We must raise at least $50,000 in the next couple of days or short weeks if we're going to be able to continue to do what we're doing and this expansion that we plan. I think we're right around $20,000 right now. So we still got a ways to go. We don't ask for money very often, which is probably one of the reasons we found ourselves in this situation.
Right. So you're kind of like the Julian Assange of religious stuff.
No.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Go ahead, Ethan. You can answer that.
So yeah, I kind of want to bring everything together that what Ryan said in kind of a more concise way. Like we originally were playing the role of source to journalists when we were just operating under Mormon Leaks and Faith Leaks, right? Like we would get these documents from our sources, then we would approach various journalists to see if they wanted to write bigger stories on them, or sometimes we would just release them and then let the media run with it, right? And then in 2019, we transitioned from the role of source to investigative journalism, right? To investigative journalists. And so now we are actually digging into the stories ourselves rather than just putting documents out there, right? And yeah, we definitely reject any association with Julian Assange. One, I feel like we've done a bit more responsible job than he has, and two, we're not sexual predators. So
right. What is that?
Well, it's a common question that we get too. Obviously, I do think it is a natural thought to think of Julian Assange when you think of us, but yeah, we definitely steer clear of that, and I guess there is some cross, some overlap in similarities of what we do, but we definitely go about it in a very different way.
I would just add that, like I say, I would direct anybody who's interested in seeing more of what they did and the type of responsible work that they're doing, go look up that Godless Bitches episode where Ethan really just took us step by step through lawsuits and how they were handled and how ultimately what they were doing was justified by the courts, basically, to say that, that they were working responsibly, they were following the law, they were actually, being respectful of people's rights. It's not just like an irresponsible, hey, let's just drop documents and throw them out there and, whatever happens. So part of the reason that I'm involved here is that they reached out to me to ask if I would be happy to support their efforts. And I was totally willing to do that based on the conversation that I had had with Ethan and realizing how responsible Ethan was with regard to this project. If I didn't think that they were doing a good job, if I didn't think that it was going to be handled responsibly and respectfully, I would not be involved with this. So I wouldn't put my name on it. I wouldn't be appearing with them. I wouldn't be behind this effort if I didn't believe that what they were doing would be well done.
Yeah, you guys have actually put people in prison based on the stuff that you've put out there. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I mean, as a direct result of our reporting, yeah, there's a man named Sterling Van Wagenen who is actually the co-founder of the Sundance Film Festival with Robert Redford. He's a prominent Mormon filmmaker. Most people outside of Mormonism aren't going to know who he is. However, he has had a film who the lead actress won an Academy Award. That film is called The Trip to Bountiful. But he directed a number of big Mormon films, if you want to put it that way, including some of the most sacred movies in Mormonism. And when I say sacred, I'm literally meaning the movies, the videos that instruct Mormons in the temple, right? So when a Mormon goes to the temple, they participate in some of the most sacred rituals that there are to the religion, and those are administered through a series of videos, and Sterling Van Wagenen directed those. We released a tape in which a man named Sean Escobar had a conversation with Sterling Van Wagenen because Van Wagenen, when Escobar was a boy, had actually molested him. And Sean was incredibly brave and confronted him about it and recorded the conversation, and Van Wagenen confessed to everything.
Wow.
Yeah, that the release of that tape actually empowered a second victim of Van Wagenen's to go to the police, and Van Wagenen is now in prison. That whole story is actually covered by the New York Times. If you Google New York Times Sean Escobar, a profile of Sean will pop up, and he was actually anonymous when we first released our tape, and we called him David in our story. And that profile, the New York Times, was the first time he tied his actual name to this story and came out as the one who recorded the tape, right? And then he was also featured in the New York Times daily podcasts.
And the Mormon Church was like covering this up, kind of like the Catholic Church. Do I understand that right?
Well,
no, that's a stretch.
Okay. But I mean, they knew about it.
It's hard to say, but definitely people within the Mormon Church knew about it. It's really hard to sort of nail down who knew what when, because they have their sort of procedures that are supposed to happen by the book, but then whether or not those procedures actually happen or not is sort of dependent on local leadership who are not getting paid and often are not following procedures to a T. So for example, in the case of Van Wagenen, he did confess to his local leadership. That's undisputed. What we really don't know is whether or not that local leadership followed the proper procedures that would have put the corporate entity of the church sort of on notice about it. When he went on to, make all of these movies that were funded by the Mormon Church, and actually also be a professor at the church-owned Brigham Young University, it's very possible that they knew, but we just don't know one way or the other. And that's actually one of the things that I think our story highlights is that the Mormon Church failed the entire situation, failed Sean, even arguably failed Sterling Van Wagenen by not holding him accountable. The system was such that here a man was able to confess to a felony to his local leadership, and literally nothing happened afterwards of consequence, including helping Sean with any needed counseling or anything like that. So is it possible that they knew and they were just, willfully turning a blind eye? It's possible. It's also possible that they just didn't know beyond the local leadership.
Yeah, and also I do want to point out one thing that I left out is that local leadership actually encouraged Van Wagenen to go turn himself into the police, which he did. And we have the police report from when he turned himself in, and we published it. He confessed to everything, but what was super interesting was this. So this took place in 1993. The police officer that took the report from Van Wagenen approached Escobar's parents and asked them if they wanted to press charges, and they said no. And so nothing became of this. And it's our understanding, and multiple prosecuting attorneys have told us this, that today in 2019, that would never happen, that the state or the county or whatever entity it was would still prosecute.
That's insane.
Insane. Sean has said publicly in interviews that he's done that, he feels like his parents were possibly encouraged, maybe even slightly pressured by some of the local leaders to sort of not press charges. Although I suppose we don't know that for sure, but they did make a statement to the police that they wanted to support Van Wagenen in his sort of efforts to change his life around, or I don't remember the exact wording. Yeah, it's a tragedy all around because Sean never got any counseling that he needed, which caused him to go on and suffer a lot of sort of mental anguish from that. He's talked about that in interviews that he's done. And then Van Wagenen not being held accountable at the time and maybe getting some of the treatment that he needed, went on to abuse at least one other person that we know of, which is the person he's in prison for right now. He didn't go to prison for what he did to Sean because the statute of limitations had been up by the time we published our report. But the victim that did finally come forward, I think, was abuse that occurred 5 or 6 years ago, roughly. So it was still within the statute of limitations. And luckily, he didn't even fight it. He actually pled guilty to the charges.
And we were actually in the courtroom when he was sentenced, and the judge sentenced him to 6 years to life. In the state of Utah, I'm not sure how it works in other states, but in the state of Utah, the recommended sentence was 6 years to life. The original sentence that for this crime is 15 years to life. However, through a plea bargain for pleading guilty, he got it down to 6 years to life. However, the judge, this was awesome, encouraged the state parole board, who is ultimately the entity who decides how long Van Wagenen's in prison, to make sure that he stays in prison for much longer than 6 years. And much longer is a quote directly from the judge. So there's that.
I actually had a Mormon boss once. I played golf with the guy, like he was the vice president. He was like a seemingly cool dude. And one day, all these federal officers just dressed like regular people, they just pulled up like regular looking cars. You never know. And they all come out, and out from underneath their shirts, just like in the movies, come these leather badges, with on the chain. And they all just pop them out. And a half a dozen of them just go throughout the entire plant with the picture of my boss saying, where is this guy? Where is this guy? And
no way.
Yeah. And everybody just stops, We're all freaking out. They end up getting him. And he was doing, right at that moment, he was speaking to some investors, like a whole team of investors, about putting more money into the company. And they come up and say, is your name whatever? And he's like, yes, it is. Or like, turn around, put your hands behind your back. They go and put him in the car right in front, while the investors are just with their fancy freaking shoes and briefcases are just standing there with their mouths open. And
wow.
Yeah, it was, he had thousands, they said thousands of pedophile pornography on his computer.
It is.
Yeah, it's absolutely shocking. He served his time. He's actually out right now.
I would love to say that that's an anomaly, but the fact of the matter is it's not.
One of the interesting things out there among Mormons, for anybody that's ever hung around Mormons for an extended period of time, the average Mormon, who is a fine person, a good person probably, they truly believe that Mormons are by far less criminal, better sort of citizens in society than the average person. They think that, that because of the teachings that they receive on Sunday and enacting those teachings, that it results in sort of a better caliber of citizen. And the reality is, I think, you put your story and our reporting and just an unbiased look at the Mormon world in general would show that, Mormons are just like anybody else. And there's a lot of good Mormons and there's a lot of bad Mormons. And their affiliation with the Mormon Church really does not have as much bearing on their goodness as Mormons would like to think. And I think that's an important myth or stereotype to break down. And I think reporting like ours and others, does that. Because I think one of the biggest things in the Sterling Van Wagenen thing, and this is kind of like some inside baseball, but a lot of times the most impactful parts of our story are related to sort of the inside baseball aspect. Most Mormons prior to our story would have never fathomed somebody who had molested at least two children, would ever rise up to the ranks of being chosen to direct Mormonism's most sacred film. There's sort of this belief and understanding that the top leaders who would have chosen him have this sort of discernment or guidance from the Holy Spirit that would prevent them from choosing such a person. I think the story of Sterling Van Wagenen shows that no, just because you have this guy who is revered among your community and has been chosen to work on these, important projects, if you will, and has lived this life, at least within Mormonism, of a certain degree of privilege, it doesn't make him immune to being a bad guy.
Did you guys connect like $32 billion with the Mormon Church in the stock market?
Yeah. I mean, the short answer is yes.
That's insane.
So, yeah, it's a lot of money.
That's a lot of control. That's a lot of power.
Well, yeah, and I think one thing that's very clear from our reporting and the sources that we have is that it's probably just barely scratching the surface of what's out there. We got a tip from somebody basically pointing us in the right direction to look. If people Google like Mormon leaks, $32 billion, they'll find our story, our wiki page that covers this, including links to the source material and a spreadsheet that sort of summarizes all of the stocks and everything that they own. But everything that we published in relation to this story was technically public information. It's just that if you didn't know where to look, you wouldn't know it was there.
Right.
So somebody, tipped us off to these 13 very generically named LLCs that are essentially shell companies used to hold these massive amounts of stocks. And we connected those LLCs, the ownership, to the Mormon Church. If you read the story, you'll see kind of how that was done. And then, of course, we used any company out there that has more than $100 million in the stock market. It triggers them needing to file this form with the SEC. It's called I believe it's called a 13F. And so we were able to, these 13 LLCs all met that threshold. And so we were able to obtain the 13F reports, which list every single stock that they own at the time you run the report. And it also has what their value was. So the $32 billion number, I think, is accurate as of year end 2017, I want to say. We're working on a follow-up story to give an update on how much they have now. You can go through the spreadsheet that we put together and you can see the different stocks that they have. And some people have tried to read into the different types of stocks that they've invested in and whatnot. Like there's private prison stocks and stocks in the parent company of Victoria's Secret, which I guess maybe some would say goes against Mormon values. But I think, I think probably a lot of that is probably a little bit of overkill. The people that we've spoken to that are sort of professionals in this world of money management have looked at these holdings and have basically said that they're almost perfectly diversified. So they aren't really going for investments in specific companies. It's because of the fact that it's $100 million in holdings that trigger this, and the fact that we only know about these 13 LLCs because somebody tipped us off to them. Not only could there be other LLCs that have more than $100 million that we just don't know about yet, but there could be other ones that have less than $100 million in the stock market and therefore, don't have this 13F that they have to file. People that we've spoken to have told us that, that I find to be credible and are in positions to know more about this, estimate that the church's actual stake in the U.S. stock market is somewhere closer to $100 billion. Their entire net worth is probably, in the $200 to $300 billion range when you factor in all the property and land that they own and all the private companies that they're known to own.
I want to clarify there that that's speculation and we don't have any documentation proving that. However, we are working on a story to dig deeper into that claim, which is on hold right now for a number of reasons. And that's actually why we're in the middle of this huge donation drive, is because the first $50,000 that we're going to get out of this donation drive is going to go towards media insurance to cover us from libel and defamation lawsuits, right? Essentially, people that we piss off that are going to want to sue us, we can't publish anything until we actually get that insurance. And so, we are working on a story to dig deeper into those claims that Ryan just said. However, we can't do so until we get some serious funding.
Yeah, I'd like to just add that, there are a lot of people outside the United States that might have access to this podcast. And just kind of an FYI, here in the US, it's very easy to sue. And it's very expensive to defend against a lawsuit, even if it's meritless. So it is really important that this foundation be insured against that, especially with the type of risk-based work that they're doing. They are very open to such lawsuits, and it doesn't even matter how responsible you are. Like I say, even if it's meritless, it can still be costly and to defend against accusations like that. So just as an FYI. And I also wanted to note that if people are interested in looking more at this information, it is at the website. You can go and find it at truthandtransparency.org. I encourage people to go and look at the work that they're doing. And also, like I say, go and look up that prior interview with Ethan, go and look at the website and see what's happening. See if this is an effort that you think is worth supporting. I know that on my Facebook feed. I don't think a week goes by when I don't post one or two or more articles about some sort of misconduct in religious institutions or religious groups that are getting a little bit too chummy with, politics when they're supposed to be apolitical and not being, they're not taxed as a result of an agreement to not be in politics. And yet every other day I'm seeing something about, religious intrusion into government. And I think there's a lot of things that go on there where probably we're only seeing the surface of it. And I like the idea of having an outlet where people can contact and say, this might be an inappropriate relationship, or this might be some inappropriate things that are going on here. Just the sheer volume of what we are seeing makes me wonder how much of it isn't being reported.
I wanted to highlight really quick something about the $32 billion story. I'm glad that you brought it up because that was actually the beginning of our investigative reporting, right? That was the first story that a source came to us with a tip, and then we had to go digging. And then we released all of our digging. And that was kind of the point where we were just like, wow, like maybe we should be digging more into these documents, more into these tips that we get, rather than because before we would just we would get something, and if it was a viable, verifiable document, we would put it out there. But then when we did the digging for a week or two into the $32 billion and had as big of an impact as it did, that's kind of when we were like, maybe we should look into actually doing some investigations of our own. And then through some prodding of and encouragements from some trusted advisors, we decided to take the plunge in January 2019, and we've had a lot of success since. So
I would just wanted to add that I think Tracy did a great job of summarizing not only what we do, but the importance of it. And I think the importance should also not be lost on religious folks. I don't know if your show particularly gets a lot of religious listeners, but if a little bit, yeah. I mean, if your listeners Google Ethan and I, they'll probably find out that we're both kind of unapologetically atheist ourselves personally. But I hope that people understand that we're not necessarily trying to destroy religion, primarily because I don't think we can, even if we wanted to. But I think that religious people should recognize that even they themselves benefit from increased transparency from their religions. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. Our organization isn't expecting, for some church to release every single email they send or, talk about every meeting that they have, release minutes. But financial transparency in regards to, let's say the pervasiveness of abuse within a particular congregation or region of a religion, those kinds of things, while they may have the potential to reflect poorly on a particular religion, ultimately put the power back into the hands of the congregants who are paying tithing, and they're the ones that are actually participating in these groups, not me. They're going to benefit from this, and we will sometimes actually get thank you messages and messages of support from religious people. A very common narrative that we'll get from Mormons that will be something like, I love the Mormon Church, I believe in the Mormon Church. The one thing that's always bothered me is their lack of transparency. So thank you for, what you've done in regards to that. And so, yeah, for those of us that have sort of left religion behind, it's often a no-brainer. I would encourage people that are still religiously minded to remember that this benefits everybody and makes all of us stronger and better for it, as a result.
Well, I really appreciate what you guys are doing, and I really appreciate all three of you coming on the show today. That's truthandtransparency.org. I'd encourage all of you to go there, help them out, try to make a difference in the world. And this is one way that I think would be a fantastic opportunity to make that difference. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you to Ryan, Gregory, and Tracy. Thank you to Dave Blair. Thank you to our patrons. You can also support this broadcast at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com. Next week, I'll be hosting a debate between Clinton Gordon and our friend Skeptic Brett from Atheists on High. The topic? Donald Trump is good for America. Clinton will be representing the affirmative and Brett the negative. Between now and then, remember that you have the right to reason.
Muchas gracias.